West Virginia is synonymous with coal miners. Oregon, loggers. Texas, cowboys. California, surfers. People in Jesus' day, shepherds. We need to understand this concept, this idea of shepherds and sheep. Because the Lord uses it all throughout the Scripture to help us understand our relationship to Him. Abel was a shepherd. The patriarchs were shepherds. Moses was a shepherd. David was a shepherd. We like other kind of animals, don't we? We like wolves. We like eagles. We like powerful creatures with strength and defenses, and we like to identify with those type of things. And yet the Creator, the Lord, uses sheep to describe us. I don't think there's a lot of people who have nightmares about sheep. As a matter of fact, we try to count them when we're trying to fall to sleep. There's nothing scary about a sheep, although they can be ornery and they can cause trouble. But we're sheep in the Lord's eyes. And before you get all bent out of shape and sad because the Lord describes you as a sheep, don't focus on that. Focus on the fact that He is the shepherd. Amen. That's the important truth for us. For the first time in John's gospel, the idea of shepherding is mentioned in this chapter. It's not going to be the last time. We'll talk about that a little bit later, Lord willing. The title of our study is Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Jesus, the Good Shepherd. I love 3 Psalms that are back to back. Psalm 22, 23, and 24. They've been called the Shepherd's Trilogy because it's in Psalm 22 that we see Jesus as the Good Shepherd, giving His life for the sheep. It starts off with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it's in that psalm that we learn a lot about the suffering Savior. It coincides with John chapter 10. And then in Psalm 23, we don't see the Good Shepherd, we see the Great Shepherd. And that coincides with Hebrews chapter 13, where the writer of Hebrews says that Jesus is the great shepherd of the sheep. And even though He's died, was buried, and risen again, He is seated at the Father's right hand, and He is shepherding His people right now. And then, Psalm 24, we see the Lord as the chief shepherd. Because at the end of the psalm, the psalmist says that we're to open the gates for the King of glory to come in, and He will return. And in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter writes to the elders. He says, I'm an elder as well. And he says that they should feed the flock of God. And then in verse 4, he says, and when the chief shepherd shall appear. He's going to deal with those shepherds that He has put in place over the flock. Now, this chapter comes on the heels, if you remember, of Jesus healing the man born blind. The contention between Jesus and the religious leaders, it's growing. And at the end of chapter 9, they ask, well, are we blind also? And Jesus basically, in His way of saying so, not only are you blind, you're still in your sins. And at this point, Jesus shares a parable. And that's the first thing we're going to look at in the first 6 verses, the parable delivered. Jesus delivers this parable. I'd like to just read it, and then we'll look at some parts of it. Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them." They didn't understand what Jesus was saying when he delivered this parable. He's going to go on in a moment and explain it in more detail to help them understand. But you and I need to understand this parable today and how it relates to us. Jesus begins in verse 1 by saying, "Verily, verily," or "truly, truly." The idea is a double amen. An amen means let it be so. So he says, "Truly, truly." Whoever gets into the sheepfold any way other than the door is not the shepherd. Now, a sheepfold would have some 6 to 7 foot high walls. Most of the time in the city, it would be made out of stone. It's where the sheep would be gathered together at nighttime. All the different shepherds that would come into the city would bring their sheep, and they would put them all in the sheepfold at night so that they would be safe. Out on the countryside, they would make makeshift sheepfolds out of brush and limbs and those type of things. And I believe, as we'll see in this section of Scripture, the sheepfold represents Israel at this point in the parable. And Jesus is speaking specifically about the religious leaders. He says, whoever doesn't come in through the door, well, they're not the shepherd. He says they're thieves and robbers. Imagine Jesus describing the religious leaders of today, those who are well known, those who are prominent. I could name names and we would immediately know specific leaders. Some good, some bad, some not so good. But Jesus is calling these guys that everybody looked up to. Everybody thought they were holy, they were righteous. They were the picture of all that is godly. And he says they're thieves and robbers. Thievery has to do with deception. You deceive someone in order to be a thief. Robbery has to do with violence. And who would ever associate deception and violence with religious leaders? Well, if you haven't, you should start. Because Jesus himself does so with men, forgive me for saying this, who lived a lot more righteous than many of the thieves and robbers of today do. So from a moral standpoint, they lived a higher standard than some of those of today even. But he says, these guys were thieves and robbers, but he that entereth in by the door, verse 2, is the shepherd of the sheep. Praise God, this morning there is a shepherd. Amen. Now, if you're not a sheep, you don't care about a shepherd. But if you are a sheep this morning, the idea of a shepherd is of the utmost importance. Because as a sheep, you have no defense. The only thing that you are a threat to is grass. And it'll grow back. You need a shepherd. And Jesus begins to describe in this parable, he says this in verse 3, to him the porter openeth. The next morning, all of the shepherds would come to the sheepfold, and the porter would be there, And the shepherd would make a distinctive call or sound or whistle or song. And those sheep that belonged to that particular shepherd would follow. They would come out of the sheepfold and follow that shepherd. There's some really neat YouTube videos. If you haven't seen this take place, I would encourage you to do a little searching. But different people would stand by the fence where the sheep were, and they would holler and sing and say all kinds of things, and the sheep would just be out there in their own little world. And then the shepherd would make a distinct little call, and here they come. And they just come running. They just come charging toward the shepherd. And that's what would take place. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. I could stop right here and take the rest of our time this morning. The sheep hear his voice. There are a lot of voices in the world this morning. Some are shouting very, very loud. There are internal voices of emotion and imaginations. There are voices from the past. There are voices declaring what the future ought to be. There are religious voices. There are demonic voices. There are all type of voices, and I wish I had a megaphone that would go around the world, and I would ask the church one simple question this morning. Whose voice are you listening to? Amen. Whose voice are you hearing? Because I am afraid far too many sheep, or those who claim to be sheep, are listening to something other than the shepherd. And those sheep are going to be in trouble. Verse 3 says, he calleth his own sheep. If that doesn't warm your heart, I'll pray for you. His own. The fact that a shepherd would even consider a sheep being something of his personal value. His own sheep. He calleth his own sheep. I'll never forget the night he called me. Amen. I'll never forget it. He calleth his own sheep by name. You ever seen a bunch of sheep out in a pasture? Or at least on TV, maybe a picture. Can you imagine knowing the names of all of those sheep? Now, I'm not a literal shepherd, so they all look the same to me. I mean, I look out there and every single one of those sheep just look like sheep. But the shepherd knows that's Betsy, that's Carl, that's Mike, that's Susie. The shepherd knows every one of those sheep. Yes, he does. He knows your name. He knows you this morning. And when nothing seems to be normal, when nothing seems to be the way that it is, be comforted, take heart this morning. The shepherd knows exactly where you are. And not only does he know where you are, he knows you intimately. Amen. And the good news is he desires that you know him the same. Yes. And then it says, he leadeth them out. One of the things about sheep is they don't really have a homing mechanism or instinct. You know, you can take a dog and you can drop him off someplace, and in a couple of days he'll be back on your front porch. But a sheep, you could take a sheep and drop him off somewhere and he is lost as a ball in high grass. He's just vulnerable. He doesn't know where he's at or where he's going. But the shepherd leads. Notice, too, that the shepherd doesn't drive the sheep. Wow, the church needs to hear that this morning. Especially the American church. We are so driven, aren't we? The idea of being driven is important to us. We pride ourselves on being driven. And we love to hear shepherds hoop and holler like a bunch of cowboys, because it feeds our senses and our carnal nature. And we love to be motivated and pumped up and that kind of craziness. We like that because we're driven. But we need desperately to learn to follow.
Amen.
That's Christianity. That's what sheep are to do. They're not to be driven. They're to follow. It says that he leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, verse 4, he goeth before them. Now, if you ask me this morning where I'm going, I may not have an answer for you, but I should be able to tell you where I'm looking. Hebrews 12:2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of my faith, our faith. If you've stopped looking to him, you've lost your way. He goeth before. I don't have to know what tomorrow holds. I don't have to know what's around the bend. I don't have to be afraid, as the psalmist said in Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Why? Because I've got my eyes on the shepherd. I'm following him. He knows where to go. He knows where to lead. And as long as he's in view and I'm by his side, I'm A-OK.
Amen.
We're to follow him. The church needs to get their marching orders from the shepherd. But we're listening to all kinds of things out in the spooky woods. The screech owls and the wolves and the coyotes and all of the other things that make noise. We hear in the distance the cowboys driving cattle and the thunder of the herds and the hooves. And we're all shaken up and disturbed, and we don't know what to do because we've taken our eyes off the shepherd. He goeth before them, and the sheep, well, they deliberate. They take a poll to see what the majority of the flock is doing and to see if they're in with the majority of the flock and make sure that the flock's going in that direction. And if so, then, we'll think, no, they follow him.
That's right.
They follow him. They don't follow the majority.
That's right.
They follow the shepherd. Why? Because they know his voice. If you don't know his voice this morning, you need to get accustomed to it. You need to spend time in this book right here. This is his very word to you, his love letter to you, his sheep. Spend time reading it, listening to him, hearing him. And he'll tune your ear.
Amen.
I went through a long season as a believer where I was disturbed by a lot of voices. Now, some of you are thinking, I knew you were crazy, Pastor, and you're not far off in your diagnosis. But the Lord allowed me to go through this season where I would just hear, I'll just say it, voices, well, you can call me crazy if you want. I hope you never experience it, but I have experienced the enemy constantly harping, constantly whispering, constantly saying things in my ear, planting thoughts in my mind. And for years I said, Lord, take this away from me, take this away from me, take this away from me. And one morning the Lord answered my prayer, but not in the way that I thought. He said, I'm not going to take it away. I'll never forget coming up for prayer time at the end of a Sunday morning. I'd asked a couple here that was part of the prayer team to pray for me. And then months and months later, I came back and I said, the Lord answered our prayers. And when he said, it's not going to go away. Their faces dropped. Their countenance was like, oh, and I said, no, but don't be sad. Don't be discouraged. And then they kind of looked puzzled. I said, because I've realized the Lord now is allowing that the enemy was seeking to use against me to help me hear the distinction.
Yes.
To hear the distinction between his voice and any other voice. Now I'm assuming this morning the voices are still there. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But I can tell you this, there's one voice coming in loud and crystal clear. Crystal clear. They know his voice. Verse 5. We may not get through verse 21 this morning, but that's okay. We're just going verse by verse, right? Verse 5. We need to hear this. And a stranger, that would be foreign, something alien. A stranger will they not follow. Now, some of you have struggled. You say, well, how do you know that we've struggled? Because I'm a Christian too. Some of you have struggled with things that seem a little strange, and you wonder, is that the Lord? Was that God? Does he want me to do this? Is that his leading? Lord, is that you? Can I put out a fleece? Let's read this. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. They don't know the voice of strangers. Well, Lord, I just don't know if that's you. Lord, I just don't know. Some of you haven't got this. I'm going to read it again. For they know not the voice of strangers. Lord, how am I going to know if this is you, if this is your leading? I just don't know. Okay, I'm going to read this again. We're going to stay here until you get it. We've got to get this morning. I'm convinced there's a lot of Christians that struggle with this. For they know not the voice of strangers. They flee, for they know not the voice of strangers. Lord, is this you? I just don't know. Yes! You guys are so smart. Oh, that's exciting. If you don't know, don't.
That's right.
If you don't know, don't. Don't go until you know. Psalm 46:10, be still and know that he is God. My sheep follow me, for they know my voice. If you'll believe that, if you'll receive that, it will free you up this morning, because so many Christians have been tormented for long periods of time trying, Lord, is this you? Do you want me to do this? I just don't know. No. Because when God speaks, you know it. He's our God. He's the one that spoke the universe into existence. God said it was. God said it was. My word will not come back void. When God speaks, you know it. You know it. And then there's only one question, not did God speak? The only question then is will I obey him?
That's right.
You won't be sitting around wondering, did he say it? You'll know he said it. I love that. That is comforting to me. But there's believers this morning that are listening to strange voices. They're listening to all kinds of voices this morning. I could spend some time here, but I won't. But I'll just leave you with one verse. 2 Corinthians 10:4, maybe two verses or three, but 2 Corinthians 10:4. Paul says, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ. Every thought. Well, what do they think? Don't care. What do they think? Don't care. What do you think about that? Don't matter. See, the sheep would be a lot better off this morning if they would just listen to one voice. Oh, that is liberating. That is freeing this morning. And in 2 Corinthians 11, I think it's verse 3, Paul says, but I fear lest somehow, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, that your minds would be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Life gets so simple when it's just, Lord, what do you say? What do you think? Where are you going? That's the way we're supposed to be living our lives. That's what a sheep does. That's all a sheep does. Well, let's see how far we can get with the rest of our time. Verse 7. Then said Jesus unto them again, Verily, verily, truly, truly, amen, amen, I say unto you. Now he's going to clear everything up. For those who wondered, well, what is this parable about? I am the door of the sheep. I'm the door of the sheep. All that ever came before me were thieves and robbers. Now he's not talking about Moses and Joshua and Abraham. He's not talking about those guys. He's talking about those would-be religious leaders that were teaching the people and leading them not to him, but away from him. And there are many today doing the same thing. They were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. So we move from this parable to this personal declaration of Jesus. And then he says it the second time, verse 9, I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. And find pasture. Now here's another question. Not just who are you listening to this morning, what are you looking for? What are you trying to find this morning? Now, if you're an eagle, you might be trying to find some wide open skies where you can feel the wind in your head feathers and you can float around above it all. If you're a wolf, maybe you're seeking to howl at the moon and run with the pack. If you're a pig, maybe you desire to wallow around in some mud, soak up the sun. But if you're a sheep, and I pray the Lord help us to hear this morning, because somehow this is being lost in this generation of Christianity. If you're a sheep, one thing matters to you. Pastures. You live and you die by the pasture. You live and you die by the pasture. Everything you get comes in the pasture. But another Bible study? Do we have to go to church to be Christian? You live and die by the pasture. Your health is dependent on the pasture. Your life is dependent on the pasture. And there's only one who knows where that pasture is. That's the shepherd. Yes. Because you will wander to your death trying to find something else and never find it yourself. And many sheep this morning have wandered far. And they're anemic. And they are sickly. And they're diseased. And the bugs are filling their eyes. And they're bugged by this. And they're bugged by that. And they're bugged by the other. And their heads are sore from butting against goats. Not realizing the difference themselves between a goat and a sheep. Amen. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. In Psalm 23, the psalmist describes them as green pastures. In Ezekiel 34, I would encourage you to read Ezekiel 34. Wow. Ezekiel 34 talks about good pastures and fat pastures. God's not interested in skinny sheep. He wants his sheep to be fat. Now, we're Americans, we don't like the idea of fat. But in the Bible, fat is a good thing. Fat is this picture of prosperity and well-being. As a matter of fact, the fat was reserved for the Lord. It was the best part. It was given to him. In verse 10, he says, the thief cometh not but for to steal, to kill, and destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly, exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we could ever ask or think. Abundant life. Oh, that means I'm going to get the car I want. That means I'm going to get the house I want. And I'm going to have on a better suit Sunday morning than Brother Spookenbacher's got. May the Lord forgive us for reducing the riches of his goodness and grace to dollars and cents. I believe God wants to provide for your every need. He's promised to do so. And keep in mind, God made Abraham rich long before the cross. Making somebody rich is nothing for him. And to have his people seeking that? That's not the message, Gordon. Come back. Abundant life. Your feeding is what will enable your following. I hope you hear this morning. Your feeding is what will enable your following. It takes strength and nourishment to follow, to move, to make progress. You must eat in order to do so. Your feeding determines your following. But it doesn't end there. Your following determines your fellowship. Your feeding determines your following. Your following determines your fellowship. And your fellowship determines whether you find abundant life or not. Abundant life is not independent of or separate from the shepherd. It is the shepherd. It's being next to the shepherd, with the shepherd. It's where I get my comfort. It's where I find my peace. It's where I find my life. My life revolves around the shepherd because he knows everything that I need. And he goes before me. And all I got to do is keep my eyes on him. Yeah, but Gordon, where's the still waters? We need still waters. We need still waters like Israel. We don't have water. We don't have water. Keep your eyes on the shepherd. He knows where it's at. Yeah. We need green pastures. We need green pastures. I bit into a rock this morning. I'm nervous. Keep your eyes on the shepherd. He knows where the green pastures is. He knows where the still waters is. He knows how to navigate you through the valley of the shadow of death. His rod and staff, they'll comfort you. But he that is an hireling. Jesus moves from thieves to robbers to describe hirelings. They're hirelings and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not. They see the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them and scattereth the sheep. Well, how can you tell the difference? How can you tell the difference between a shepherd, a pastor and a hireling? Well, a hireling is a professional. Churches are looking for professionals.
That's right.
They want their preachers to look and act like lawyers and doctors and politicians. They want them to be purty. They want them to smell good. They don't want them to smell like sheep. But how do you shepherd if you don't smell like sheep? Oh, but we don't want our shepherd to smell like sheep. We want professionals. Well, you can have at it. There's a bunch for you to choose from. But just keep this in mind. A pastor will feed you. And speaking of Ezekiel 34, over a dozen times the Lord talks about feeding my sheep, feeding my sheep. You're feeding yourselves, but you're not feeding my sheep. Amen. And this is the first time shepherding is mentioned in John's gospel, but in John 21, the last time, Jesus is restoring Peter, and he says this to Peter. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. But all that church wants to do is study the Bible. The church has got to be more than that. We need more than that. Feed my sheep. Give us more, Pastor. Feed my sheep. Make this happen, Pastor. Feed my sheep. Do you know that suicide is high among pastors these days? Burnout is high among pastors. You say, well, why is that? They don't do nothing. That's a different discussion. But here's one of the reasons I believe that's the case. For those who have a conscience, there's an eternal struggle on the inside of them. Because the Lord is calling them to be one thing, and the flock wants them to be another.
Amen. That's true.
Feed my sheep. See, because a hireling, he's just a professional. He's not interested in feeding you. He's interested in feeding himself. A hireling doesn't feed the sheep. A hireling fleeces the sheep. You know that cold chill that runs up your spine? That's because that professional that you wanted, like Israel, wanted a king like everyone else. And it broke Samuel's heart. And God said to Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. The same thing is happening today in the church.
Yes.
Because the church don't want pastors. The church wants professionals.
Yes, that's right.
But then the sheep want to leave when they hear click. And that chill runs up the spine. And they don't realize it. All their fluffy little white wool is gone.
Yes, that's right.
And they look like them little mole rats or them weird looking cats that don't have any hair. I know some of you love them. But a lot of sheep are looking like that because so pastors feed the sheep, professionals fleece the sheep, but predators, and there are some of them as well, they feed on the sheep. And the Lord deals with those type of pastors in Ezekiel 34, for with force and cruelty they rule the sheep. Wow, this is not what I was planning on saying so much, but.
Glad you did.
And then for the second time, verse 14, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and am known of mine. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring. And they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold. Now, in the King James, the word fold is used twice there, but in the Greek, this last word fold is a different word. It's not the same word for fold, 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 fold. It would have been better translated flock. Because Israel was the sheepfold. They rejected the good shepherd. He laid down his life for the sheep. He says, but I've got other sheep. And that ought to make you shout, because that is you and me. That's us. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Them I also must bring. And from Jew and Gentile, wow, that'll preach. Jew and Gentile, there shall be one flock and one shepherd. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. No man taketh it from me. I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down. I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. So we have the parable. We have the personal declaration. Now the people are divided, and they're still divided today, and I don't understand why. Last 3 verses, we'll read them, and we'll touch on whatever the Lord deems we should come back to, Lord willing, next week when we come back. He said, there was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings. And many of them said, he hath a devil and is mad. Why hear ye him? Others said, these are not the words of him that hath a devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind? Those who hear his voice are not divided this morning. There's no doubt in my mind who Jesus is. He's my shepherd. And I wake up every morning not to see another blue sky and puffy clouds. I wake up every morning not to feel the breeze blowing in my little lammy ears, or the grass bowing down with that same breeze. I don't wake up every morning to plop down in the sun with a fat tummy full of that green grass. I wake up every morning to look into the eyes of my shepherd. And may I never lose sight of the awe and wonder that he would even care for me, Amen. Much less give his life for me. And even when I run from him, I'm being chased down by goodness and mercy. And if I stop too fast, I'll get run over by them. And I can't tell you how many times that shepherd's crook has gently taken me by my neck and pulled me out of the thicket. When my little cloven hooves were digging on for dear little life on the edge of the cliff, about to fall to my demise. And his gentle, loving hands took hold of me and pulled me up into his bosom. That's what I live for. That's abundant life. Oh, wolves? As long as I'm near him, I don't have to worry. Hirelings? Let them flee. Watch them run. My shepherd is by my side. I have nothing to fear. And what's so good about this is it's just begun. With every passing day, it gets better and better. Until one day, these little bitty sheep eyes are going to open, and they're going to be bigger than the sheep, because I'm not going to be in a pasture anymore. I'm going to be in his very presence for all of eternity. Oh, he's a shepherd. He's a good shepherd. He's the great shepherd. He's the chief shepherd. And I'm thankful to be his sheep. Amen. Let's pray. Lord,